thanks again for inviting me, and I'm so thrilled to be here. I learned that some of you are opening your final exhibitions, or maybe they're not final, but some sort of exhibition, so I'm glad that I'm talking about exhibitions today. And I hope to see your work, which someone had said it's around the corner, so I'll come by. So I wanted to talk about exhibitions because I am a curator and I run the Wattis Institute at CCA, but I kind of got to that role in a circuitous way, and I actually started working in development, which is fundraising at a museum, the Guggenheim in New York, and then I found my way into academia, so I did public programs, as Sonoy had mentioned, and so I did a lot of programming, and I realized that I really wanted to be in a space with art objects and people. So public programming was amazing because I got to, organize things like this, like gathering a talk or a performance or a screening and having an artist talk about their practice, but I was really missing objects, and I studied art history, and so I thought that I should veer into exhibition making because, once all of you are makers, once you create the object, it leaves your studio, and then where does it go? And exhibitions are a way for your objects to be in a space, and the ideas and kind of processes that you put into the work kind of translate to people and viewers and visitors. And so that kind of configuration is really unique and special, and I think as artists, you have a way that you can work with curators, work with installers, and try to share something of your work. So making is one part of your practice, but exhibition making can be another part of your practice. And it's really collaborative because you do it with someone, and that's why I love working with living artists, because I get to talk to them about what they think that the show should be. I mean, some artists are really relaxed about it. They're like, do what you want. And some are really specific, and some are really collaborative. So I just wanted to talk about different ways of what an exhibition can be, because there's all these different ways to think about it. So I'll just share 5 shows. So I'm going to talk about exhibition as research, exhibition as information or information, exhibition as embodied knowledge, and exhibition as conversation, and exhibition as healing. And part of an exhibition is also, you have to bridge the objects and those ideas with people. So there's always things like the wall label or written text, the brochure. There's also public programs. So the context of how you made something or the context of your exhibition is also an important part of all of it. So I'm just gonna start by also sharing something that was really meaningful to me. I was an intern at the Santa Monica Museum of Art when I was in high school. I think I must have been like 16 or 17. I didn't really know anything about art, and a friend of mine in high school said, do you want to be an intern with me? You get paid, they pay for your lunch. I was like, sure. And I always loved art, but I never was actually invited to go to museums. My parents didn't really know what that was, and they were working all the time. So I knew about art through books. My parents would, take me to the library, buy me books. So that's how I got to know about exhibitions. But when I was in high school, I thought, okay, let me try. What is this thing called a museum? I'm not sure. But I was an intern and at the Santa Monica Museum of Art, which now is ICA LA. So if you're ever in LA, visit ICA LA. It's an incredible space. So when I was there, I was a gallery guard. So I was like one of these people that's like, please don't touch the art. And that was my first art job. And later, a friend of mine put together this book called Museum Memories, and she asked a lot of friends and colleagues in the art world, like, what is the most impactful museum memory you've had? So what are the exhibitions that you've encountered that are special to you? So I wrote about my first experience with what I knew as an exhibition. I didn't really even know what an exhibition was, but I'll just read you my memory of it. So it was the fall of 2001. I was a gallery guard at the Santa Monica Museum of Art working at the opening of Freestyle, a group show that traveled from the Studio Museum in Harlem in New York to Los Angeles. And in this group show, I was witnessing a generation of artists who broke apart forms, used new materials, found different ways to articulate what it meant to live and be. When works or exhibition create that atmosphere of feelings, it becomes embodied. It starts in my stomach and burrows deep into my bones. It first happened then and sometimes happens now. So this group show was a group show of working Black artists, young Black artists at the time, and that was my first experience with exhibitions. So that's how I understood what an exhibition could be, and it was really different forms. Everyone was making using different materials, but really trying to kind of find their voice in their materials through their identity, through politics. And so the Studio Museum in Harlem, which just actually reopened, they renovated, is a really unique space to have exhibitions like this for young Black artists. They have also a residency program. So this is kind of what I knew what an exhibition could be, and that's why I think it's so important for me to keep doing this work. But I'll start with where I am now, which is at the Wattis. The Wattis is also part of an art school like here, and we just opened a big building, and the Wattis used to be a few blocks away but moved back onto campus, so we're surrounded by makers. So we're on the second level, but below us is all studios. So I get to be just like peeking into studios and seeing what students make. So this is just a few shots of what our space looks like. It's more of a pavilion space. These are some of the indoor-outdoor studios. But currently right now there's an exhibition called 8 Hours of Work, 8 Hours of Rest, 8 Hours of What You Will. So part of the Wattis, there's a research arm to it, and in the past they used to have one artist that they think through for the entire year, but I switched it up a bit and I wanted one idea. So I wanted multiple artists to think alongside us being the curators, about this topic, which is labor. And if you're, we're in San Francisco, where it's, the hub of like everything technology. It's very geared towards AI right now. And so we were thinking about the history of San Francisco as such an important city to the making of unions. There's such a rich history of that and solidarity for workers. And then meanwhile, present day, there's a kind of decimation of workers through things like AI. So kind of like this, using the backdrop of San Francisco, we really wanted to dig a little bit deeper into what it means to be working. And the title comes from a slogan. So, late 1800s, people would be working 16, 17 hours a day, and they would have no limitation. Like, there was so much exploitation. So the turn of the century, 8 hours of work was a really important shift in the way that we shape our day and our time. So this slogan was a real slogan, and so I used it as a framework. So it's a 3-part show. So the first one was 8 hours of work, the second 8 hours of rest, and the third 8 hours of what you will. And the first one and the third one are group shows, and then the second one was a solo presentation with Soil Thornton, who's based in New York. And so you'll see on the right-hand side just all these artists whose work thinks about labor, and talking to each of these artists and seeing from their point of view what labor means to their practice and their work, and how they make work alongside these ideas was really fruitful. And so the way, I call it a research exhibition, which isn't, a real typology. We just kind of made it up. But what we wanted was to, as we learn alongside them, to change the shape of the exhibition. So for example, when we worked with Soil, they just had such a interesting way of thinking about exhibition making and their work. For example, for the group show, here, let me show images. The group show, you'll see these green walls, for example, and they kept them green for the next show because I was like, do you want to paint in white and make it more neutral? And they're like, no, I feel like nothing is neutral. You know, as an institution, you made a decision to make these walls green, and I don't think that anything is neutral, so I want to respect what you have also made before me. So there's always someone that comes before you and someone that comes after you, and so they kept the walls green. So things like that, you know, permeated throughout the making of the show, the 3-part show. Because it's a research exhibition, you know, we have these like seating, we have books, it's more of a library feel. There's also these cabinets that hold all these archival materials. So one thing that we did as part of our research that we wanted to show and share was that we went to the labor archives, which is at UCSF. And in the labor archives, they have incredible material, including you know, things like the California Labor School. So what that was anyone who was part of a union could take art classes, or I think it was like $6 to take a class. You could take like welding, and you could also take history, so, or, you know, learn Spanish. So there was all these kind of really unique ways that unions would work to help the betterment of workers and society. So these ideas are so utopian, you know, you would never expect that now, but we were hoping that it would inspire people to think about what it means to be part of a collective and how to work better. So this is kind of the first iteration of the group show. But another thing is, like, we wanted objects to be a part of our learning. So in the back we have Aria Dean, who is more of a conceptual artist, but you know, she was thinking about cotton and the legacies of slavery and what that means in today's time. So we would read essays alongside looking at these works, we meaning like the public and also the curators. Like, we would have internal conversations about this, but also open it up. So there was public programs that we hosted, and these are some of the other archival materials that you can see. We also had a set of screening room. This is Kenneth Tam's film. And these are some of the other objects in the show. And this is an outdoor piece that we did. So something like this was really interesting because when we learned about Tania Candiani, who's the artist based in Mexico City, she was really interested in this photograph that she came across, which Dorothea Lange, who's a photographer, was one of the few photographers who were allowed into the Japanese concentration camps. And so she learned, like through these photographs, well, we learned, you know, historically that the Japanese and Japanese Americans were sent to the concentration camps, but not only were they, you know, separated from society and put into these camps, they were also made to work. So they were actually labor camps. And the women especially would make these camouflage textiles as part of their labor, which was used for the military. So someone like Tania Candiani, who is based in Mexico, was thinking about the border between US and Mexico and the militarization of that border and how that actually came to be. And this photograph kind of sparked this research that she went down. So in turn, we learned about this history too. And so for her project, we replicated this weaving of camouflage. And this is the front gates of our school at CCA. So these types of interventions and learning and making while learning was a big part of the exhibition. So we had lectures. We also did a bike tour of all the labor sites in San Francisco. So there's this amazing historian, very Marxist, who does these 4-hour bike tours. And I was like, oh God, are we really gonna bike around the city for 4 hours? He was like, fine, for you guys, we'll do 3 hours. But it was fascinating, like just going through your city, your own city, and learning about who made the city and how did they make it and all the history that goes into it. And SF and Seattle, there's a lot of similarities and what happens via gentrification and what happens with tech and all these things that we kind of miss and forget about. But with something like this, we could, as a group, learn through like biking around. It was actually really fun. So I don't know if they have anything like this in Seattle, but you should definitely try to look for that. So this is the idea of labor as a research exhibition. I also wanted to talk about another university, school, and a museum within that. So if you haven't noticed, I've worked in a lot of museums that are within schools because I just really love education and pedagogy. So it's kind of something that I hold dear to me. So at the Carpenter Center, which is the Contemporary Art Center at Harvard, houses the museum, but it also houses the art department. So there's also filmmaking, studio art, and there's also a film archive downstairs. And it's the only building built by Le Corbusier in North America. So it's very much an architectural gem. So there's a lot about design with this building. It's really unique. It's a concrete kind of bunker type building, very much in line of mixing Bauhaus influences. So I was trying to think of an artist who can think alongside students and also play with the architecture. So exhibition as information, like information as a knowledge, but information as like you are in formation, and an artist who thinks about forms really specifically. So there's an artist named Matt Keegan who is based in New York that I thought could do a really interesting project. So this is a solo exhibition and commissioned by him. He's so interested in the exploration of language and materials and forms, but also how an identity is formed. So this was his exhibition, and you see like even the kind of basket weaving, it almost looks like basket weaving, but it's actually cardboard. And it's so easy. It's like pattern making. So he's thinking about forms and patterns, and you get two pieces of cardboard and you weave it together. So it wrapped around the whole exhibition space, which was around, I think it was like 900 feet or something, and kind of held the space through this weaving, which is just cardboard, which is such an easy material to get a hold of, kind of holding the space together. And so that was one element that we decided that we needed for the space. He also put these kind of cutout forms that are actually metal, and then they also have this, now I'm forgetting the technology, but I think it's contact mics inside the metal. So when you could hear a slight vibration that goes through the metal, and these laser cut sculptures and the kind of sound element was in collaboration with another artist, Sergei Cherepin. But just like to kind of share that the vibrations, like this is a living material, this is a living sculpture, like we are always in formation, we're always responding to things. I think he wanted to kind of highlight that. So there's another picture of that. But how he makes it is actually through paper. He cuts paper and folds paper. So it's a really simple way of doing it, and then he kind of blows it up and fabricates it in metal. So in some ways, like, we're always shaped by things. Like, there's a lot around design and shape and form in that way. Also on the right-hand side, there was a video installation, and the two screens were facing each other. And, because he's interested in identity formation, he was also thinking about, like, how do we get the ideas that are instilled within us? Where do these ideas come from? Like, how are we shaped? So he interviewed his own family, and he asked them things like, what is love? Like really basic questions. And so one screen, one channel is that interview, and the other channel is shapes that he would ask, like, what is the color of love, and change the color. What is the shape of love? it was so interesting because when he asked about race, his niece, who I think was 7 at the time, she's like, oh, it's when you compete with your friends and whoever runs faster wins. You know, and you're like, oh, right, like a 7-year-old is not thinking about like color lines. But then he would ask his dad, who grew up in the Bronx, and his mom, who's Cuban, like, what do you think about race? And they just had such a different idea. And so these types of ideas that form within us is something that he's investigating in these works. We also commissioned this curtain that would also kind of, there's all these windows that are part of the Carpenter Center, but he wanted like a softness to the space too. So you're kind of entering this like interior space that has this kind of softness. So we did a lot of site responsive installations. And then, during the pandemic, I moved to Marfa, Texas. So this is a space that is not tied to a university or a university gallery or anything like that. But it's a really unique place. It's in West Texas. It's in Marfa. It's on the borderlands between Mexico and the US. And it's also, I don't know if you guys have learned about Donald Judd and minimalism, but Donald Judd had come to Marfa and kind of staked his ground. And so his museum is there, the Judd Foundation is there. And so it's a weird little town of 1,500 people, but it's also an art town. And there's so many complexities to this place. And I was only there for 5 years, but I had never lived in a small town. But it taught me a lot about so much about politics, about the natural landscape, and so the kind of joy was to work with artists who also were intrigued by this place. So at Ballroom, let me see what show. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit about Donna Huanca's show, and she actually had a show at the Henry. I don't know if you saw that show. I wanted to talk about it because I thought some people might be familiar with her show here, but you know, I'm thinking about exhibition as embodied knowledge. This was the first show that I did at Ballroom, so I came at 2020, which was the height of the pandemic. So this was the first show as like the doors were opening up. And I was thinking about embodiment because, you know, there was so much actually like fear around touch, you know, like people would not even get close to one another. I don't know if you guys remember this. You know, it feels so far away now, but everything was touchless. Like you couldn't get near people. It would just like, everyone was like cringing all the time. And also like there were so many people also like doom scrolling. Like there was also something about like not being in a place together with people and bodies that I think we're learning some of the repercussions of that. But Donna is such an artist that, you know, touch and feeling and intuition is so important to her work, and I thought she could be such a great show to open up the space. And so she does these really site responsive installations, and you kind of enter her world. And so you see like here it's like a really all white space, like even the floor is white, and she wanted you to like come into this world that she has created. So you'll see she did a series of paintings and new sculptures as well. So exhibitions for artists are really important too because, you know, there are commercial galleries. She has had, you know, success in the commercial realm, but in some ways those shows are geared towards, to be frank, making money. Or selling the works to collectors. And sometimes they could be interesting, but for artists, they are always trying to push ideas. So a museum show, or a show in a nonprofit space, it's not really about making money. It's really about sharing something with the public. And so doing things like making new sculptures was an opportunity that she just grabbed onto, especially because, you know, as you're thinking about embodied knowledge and having these sculptures that are so visceral. I mean, this was over 8 feet tall, and she had never made big sculptures like this. And so it was an opportunity for her to share. And, you know, sculpture, paintings are easier to sell, as you know. I don't want to go deep into the art market and how messed up that is, because I love sculpture. But you know, sculpture, especially this 500-pound, I think it was like 700-pound sculpture, is like really hard to sell. So galleries will be like, what do you want to make? No, don't do that. But for me, I was like, yeah, you want to make a sculpture? Let's do it. Go for it. So she made a series of these sculptures, and she called this one I have to look up the name, hold on one second. But it translates into warrior, like feminine warrior, protective feminine warrior. And it was like something that was so powerful. When we uncrated it, like everyone gasped because it was so visceral. Like the energy, all the kind of, you'll see it has like hair, it has like all these kind of elements that are attached to it. They just really spoke. So it had this power to it that was incredible. So we were really happy to be able to have her show this type of new work. These are some other shots of the work. She also wanted to have this work, which looks really abstract, but she works with a lot of models, she calls them. Instead of performers, she calls them models. And what she does is she paints directly on top of their bodies, and then she kind of lets them dance or press up against the wall. And so the body kind of leaves all these traces, and you don't know what these necessarily are. Like a viewer will walk in and be like, what was here? Like, what happened? So she kind of is like opening up the invitation to have the viewers ask, like, what happened here? And kind of just surmise. And, you know, in this part of the region, in Texas, there's a lot of like cave paintings and that type of artwork, early human artwork, and so that kind of like resonated with a lot of the audience in West Texas as well. So in addition to her indoor piece, that sculpture, she also had never done an outdoor piece, and the outdoor piece is almost like a twin or a mirror, and she really had wanted to do an outdoor piece for so long, but it's one of these things where, you know, every chance you get as an artist, you're like, can I do this? Like every time you get an invitation, you're like wanting to try something, and depending on the institution, you know, it's like, if they can't do it, then you save it for the next one. So when she asked me if she could do an outdoor piece, I was like, definitely. Like Marfa is about the outdoors, it's about the landscape. And so this piece was on a plinth, made out of adobe, and then the sculpture sat on top of it. Let me see if I have a bird's eye view. And then this is kind of a bird's eye view. She made this drawing with stones around the piece, and it's almost a reference to Nazca lines. I don't know if you've ever heard of these lines where they were made thousands of years ago, but there are these indentations in the land, and they don't know how the ancient peoples had thought of them or conceptualized them, but they're really very specific geometric shapes. Sometimes they're the shape of a bird or a drawing of a bird, but they're huge. You know, sometimes they're like 100 miles long, and so now people can like see it like drone shot or like a helicopter. You can see the massive structure of them and how they looked. But what she also did was, you'll see the columns, those are sound towers. So she had this sound piece going of her grandmother, who's Quechuan, so she's Bolivian American. So her grandmother's like trying to teach her Quechuan words. So, you know, thinking about like her identity and how language and these kind of like deeper traditions and rituals are embedded in her, and how she can make forms and work out of that type of learning. And so a lot of the work itself is so visceral. And one thing that, you know, I've known Donna for a really long time, and I think her work gets a little bit misunderstood because they look at the paintings and they're like, oh, you must be interested in abstract expressionism. And she's like, God, no, like, I hate all those white men. She's like, don't ever put me in a corner with them. So like she lives in Germany. So like that history of like European painting is like so pressed up upon her, and she's really resistant to that. She's like, honestly, I try to read all these books about them, and I just like do not connect with that at all. And her way of painting, she actually it's very visual and textured, but she uses her hand. She doesn't even use a paintbrush. I don't know if there's not a close-up, but everything is literally by her hand. And so, a show like this, it was important for the artist to share that with me, and for me to contextualize that for her. So this is the catalog that we did after the show, and instead of having, like this Western perspective of Western painting she's always contextualizing, we thought of other writers like Roberto Tejada, who's based in Texas, Marcela Guerrero, who's the Whitney Curator of Latin American Art, who just did the biennial. There's all these other thinkers that understand, like, she's coming from a totally different part of the world. She's coming from a totally different traditions, and how to kind of foreground her position in that. And so the texts that were written were to kind of pull that out instead of kind of mapping on this history that she's kind of had to endure. Because as an artist, like, you put the work out in the world and you kind of wait to see what happens. But if you're a living artist, you can have a voice in it, and you can, everything is a discourse, so I don't think that, it's not like a terrible thing for these people to write about abstract expressionism. Like, it's all part of a conversation, but sometimes like those conversations get overshadowed. And so I think it was important for her to have this other conversation going where she's like, actually, I'm not coming from a Western perspective. So I think exhibitions, the next chapter, the next life of it, is something like a catalog, and people can access like what that show was and have the context that the artist is looking for. So I think that's another important part of exhibition making. Here's Roberto Tejada. And yeah, he makes really interesting references to like Ana Mendieta and artists like that instead of, abstract expressionists. I also wanted to talk about this show because it's exhibition. Also, can I do a time check? Am I on time? I feel like I'm talking a lot. Just shout out if I'm like going to overtime. But
It's 12:11. We have like 20-ish minutes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to talk about this show, which I felt like was exhibition as conversation. So the first few shows that I've been talking about are solo exhibitions and mostly commission works. This is another type of exhibition, which is a group exhibition. So I was thinking about the context I was sitting in at Ballroom Marfa, which is in this borderland, and the history of it. I think, as an art person, you kind of enter Marfa through the lens of Judd, but when I got there, I was like, there's something going on here. Like, what is happening in this town? And I didn't quite understand why I felt so honestly strange. And I realized like that the town itself is actually over 60% Latinx, mostly Mexican. Yet you literally do not see any brown people on the street. I was like, what? This is so weird. And like, who you see are actually tourists and white people, but they're like a minority actually. And so I was like, what is this about? And so I kept on asking people. Some people were like, we don't know what you're talking about. This is fine. But some people were like, oh, okay, like let's go learn about this because there's like such deep segregation in this town. There's it's a railroad town, Marfa. And so the railroad tracks literally was a segregation line. So the white people would live on one side and then the brown people would live on the other side. And the white side, they literally called Hollywood. And the schools were segregated, elementary schools, because there was a loophole. The high schools were desegregated. Brown versus Board of Education made that happen, but you would have to like the Mexican kids would have to literally carry their desk over the railroad track to go to school and like carry everything with them. I mean, it wasn't so far into history, and so there moments like that where I was like, okay, there's something so much deeper that's happening here. And another thing that I noticed was that, you know, my neighbors who were mostly Mexican, like some wouldn't speak Spanish, like at all. They would always speak English, but some would only speak Spanish. So there was also something around language that I was like, okay, something's happening here as well. So these kind of like question marks I had, I wanted to obviously have a conversation around them, but with artists. And so the show itself, the group show itself, the objects, I found they were talking to each other, but it was really important for me to have these conversations with these artists. So these are the 5 artists that were in the exhibition. And the quote, the title of the show, Tongues of Fire, comes from a Gloria Anzaldúa text, and I'll just read it to you. Write with your eyes like painters, with your ears like musicians, with your feet like dancers. You are the truth sayers with quill and torch, write with your tongues on fire. So this is like her kind of anthem to writers in the 80s, women of color, writers of color, to kind of like say your truth, and your experiences matter and should be told. So there was a lot of that type of, you know, if you're a serious writer, you're not supposed to talk about that. But she was like, no, we have to talk about that. We have to learn about your experience. So she is like part of this Chicana movement that was also like embedded in postmodernism and identity politics and post-colonialism. So she is a very important writer, especially on the borderlands. She has a whole book called Borderlands. So that's kind of the inspiration also for this exhibition. And how the exhibition worked was there was this kind of centerpiece, I guess. This is a work by Jorge Méndez Blake, an artist based in Guadalajara, who also had spent time in Marfa, and that was kind of the centerpiece. And then if this is another angle, and so there were also on the other side of the gallery space, there was a video installation and photographs, and I wanted to kind of like make the show where the works themselves were talking to each other. And there was also a sound piece that there are 2 sound pieces, Jerome Ellis and oh my god, am I forgetting her name? Hold on. This is a long time ago. Memory has gotten really bad during COVID. Wait, where's the last artist? So Jerome Ellis, oh, sorry. Okay, so Jerome Ellis had a sound piece, and then Jesse Chun's video also had sound. So they were, we kind of rigged it so one sound piece would go, and then it would pause, and then the sound from the video would go. So there were actually, it almost felt like a conversation between each other. Let me just share a little bit about some of the important works. So this is Jorge Méndez Blake's piece called Hide a Poem, and he was invited to Warsaw, the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, and he was just like trying to figure out what he wanted to do, and he went to the Jewish ghetto, and he learned that the Jewish people were, separated and segregated into the ghetto, and couldn't access the different parts of the city, but they would hide all these forms of communication with each other through the brick walls. And there was some more important information that they would share with each other, but he also found that they would just share poems with each other. And so, he was thinking about okay, you're, in the war, you're separated from the rest of society, but poems and language still need to exist. And it was as important to share poems as it was to share important information, like when to sneak out or how to, there was a resistance that was happening. So, he was thinking about the resilience of language. So this little piece of paper was like stuffed in between. This was really hard to make. It looks really easy, but it was so hard. I felt horrible for the installers because you got to go really perfect because then it like leans this way. But throughout the installation, there's all these little poems that he would hide and pieces of paper. So that's Jorge's piece, which is the centerpiece. And this piece is Nakai Flote, who is Lapanapachi. So as I was talking to people from the region, I was curious about, obviously the land is very ancient land, but the indigenous people in Texas, it was like such a brutal eradication that only recently people are learning that they are part indigenous and relearning their language, their the flora, the fauna, the rituals, everything. So Nakai, who is actually a trained anthropologist, who's from Presidio, which is just one town over, who's actually not really an artist, but I feel like she had this way of becoming an artist that I asked her to be in the show because I wanted her to talk about the language of the Apache people. And I'm just going to read the quote about what this means. The piece is called Anayasad, and she asked through this piece, is there an aftermath to linguistic genocide? How does a language stay alive post-extinction? Can a language made of earth and water be decimated? Can the fire speak back to us? And so Inayasad, which is the title of the piece, also means the language life giver. And, she really wanted to impress upon her community, her indigenous community, that came to the show and lived so nearby. Because there's this struggle with like, language, there's like a fear of the language being gone, and so there's a mixing of language. So a lot of the language was also mixed with like Spanish, because there's a lot of intermarrying with Mexican people, and she was just saying like, don't be afraid, the language will always speak back to us because the land is always here, which I thought was so beautiful. So the kind of what you see is this podium with a traditional drum, and then you'll hear the sound pieces that she has made. So they're like field recordings, they're storytelling moments that she had, and we got a grant and actually sent her to the Smithsonian because a lot of the peyote ceremonies, the recordings of those ceremonies are only in the Smithsonian, which was wild to hear. That she was like, we don't even have our own recordings, it's in the Smithsonian. And she was like, can you send me to the Smithsonian? I was like, definitely. And that recording, she's like, because it's for our people, like I'm not gonna put it in the sound piece, but please know that like I shared it with my tribe and my community. And so I thought that was so special. And so the sound pieces aren't, those types of recordings, but it's actually like responses to what she's learned about the language as well. So that is this piece. That's her giving a tour of that. And Augustina Zuazua was the last known speaker in 1940, and she is recorded in the history of this. So facing that is this piece with Jesse Chun, which was also the outdoor, hold on, let me see if I have a picture of the outdoor, which was also this piece that we see. So there was an outdoor element as well as an indoor. And so she was specifically looking at the Blackwell School, which was the school for the Hispanic school for kids. So there's a loophole where they forced the segregation because it was a neighborhood school, and so they all the Mexican students had to be segregated from the white students, even though they literally lived in the same neighborhood. And what was really painful about some of these memories that were really painful was that they couldn't speak Spanish, even though they spoke Spanish at school. And so there was a suppression of their own native tongue. And in fact, they had this ritual, which Jesse was like, interested in like digging deeper into, which they had to write little pieces of paper of Spanish and then put it in this box and bury Mr. Spanish. It's like so dark that they made the students do that so that you wouldn't speak. And so it's like literally buried in the ground. And what was incredible, Jesse found out that the students, now they're like in their 70s and maybe even 80s, and they did a ceremony where they didn't remember where Mr. Spanish was dug, but they like did a ceremony where they like dug it up and they're like, we're gonna speak our language, even now and today. So she was really influenced by this history in the 50s up to the 70s actually, and wanted to make this film. It's more of an experimental film, but it's all about unearthing. And she is born in Korea, grew up in Hong Kong, lived in Canada, and now lives in the US. And so language for her was something that was always tenuous and fleeting, and she's always trying to like kind of complicate the way that we communicate with each other and speak to each other, and always trying to like understand what is your mother tongue and find that. And so using this story, she really wanted to like pay her respects to those students at the Blackwell School and the act of like the land and unearthing, and that next to Nakai's installation, like I thought that they were like really having this conversation with each other. So this is another shot of it. And she also did these kind of drawings that are scores, and what she does is she takes words and then pulls them apart so they're just graphic objects, and just a way to like unlearn the kind of hegemonic language, which is English. So at some points, like even in the film, like the O's just become spread out, and it looks like a circle, almost like Donna Huanca circle. But those are drawings. But one interesting thing, like if we're thinking about exhibition as conversation, Lisa Harris is a musician and had an installation in the other part of the gallery, a totally different separate show, but was curious to use these as a score. So Lisa asked Jesse, like, can I actually do this performance? Because Lisa's also interested in language and the body and singing, and so she actually, for the opening, did this performance of the drawings themselves. So that, if you kind of expand the format of an exhibition as a conversation, like all these things can happen, and they're really organic ways of letting something reveal itself. And next to Jesse's work is Jerome Ellis, who is also a musician and just started to do these photographs, but Jerome is what he calls disfluent. So he has a stutter, their pronouns are they have a stutter. And what was so beautiful and fascinating about how they thought about their stutter and disfluency was, their way of disfluency is that they pause for a long time. And so sometimes, there's this fluidity when you speak, someone speaks back to you like in a millisecond. But with Jerome, there's like a deep pause. And they were like, well, in my head, I'm already speaking, and this is the way I speak. So I was like, oh, right, like we have to learn the way you speak. For Jerome's entire life, they had to always learn how we speak. So they always have to say, by the way, I have a stutter, so if I pause, this is what's happening. and always trying to explain themselves, but in such a generous way with their music, they're trying to allow us to understand how they speak. And so it's kind of a reversal in the way of speaking and fluidity, because I think fluidity is, in some ways they were like, it's also a form of capitalism, like everything is so smooth, everything has to be like tied up in a bow and like circulated in such a way. And in many ways, Jerome has such a different way of speaking, but also, these photographs are ways that they hear and speak through the land. So this is them in North Dakota, and they were on a residency and did a series of works and almost like private performances to the land where they can, feel the vibrations of the land, and then that comes out through their instrument, which is a saxophone. This is what's documented. And they have this really beautiful book and album called The Clearing that you should check out. And lastly, I'll talk about Adriana Corral, who is based in LA and Houston, but what was so fascinating was that she knows about Marfa because her parents' ballroom was a ballroom, and it was, this is segregated time, so it was where the Mexican families would be their dance hall and their social space. And she told me that her parents had their first date at ballroom, and it just blew my mind. I was like, what? And her grandfather was part of the Bracero program, which was this really also complicated history in the U.S. where Mexican laborers would come to the U.S. in the hopes of getting citizenship, but were treated really horribly, and there were things like they would be doused with like DDT and have health problems in the future. But Adriana is a more conceptual artist, but she was thinking about, how language holds their meaning. So on the left-hand side, you'll see these etchings that are embossed and debossed in different languages, and it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was after World War II and the Holocaust, this Declaration of Human Rights was instated to ensure that genocide or horrible human acts don't happen again. And in some ways, we all should believe those things because we're living humans in this society, but Adriana's trying to like push that and say, well, yeah, we could say those things, but do we mean it? Like, how do we abide by these things that we say? So, she has these tablets with the declaration, and they're made out of ash. And as, the weather happens, like wind, rain, they kind of slowly dissolve. And, trying to indicate to us, like, if we don't take care of these things and let it just, like, dissolve in the wind, like, these things can happen again. Like, genocide is literally happening right now, like Gaza. Like, there's all these things that we can say, but do we mean them, and how do we enforce that? And what you see, this hole that she has made is actually, it's a grave site, basically. So it's 6 feet deep and I forget how many feet long, but it's meant to like entomb something. So there's a lot of things in the show, like conversations that were happening around like language being buried, history being buried, but also like a resilience, like always possibility. So I think these artists were so interesting because there's always something that can happen, which I found really hopeful, even though this, digging a tomb is not so hopeful. And if you meet Adriana, she's like the loveliest, like happiest person. And I'm like, wow, that's like a really intense, dark piece. But I think, these artists also hadn't met each other. So like each of them meeting each other, having conversations among each other, having their works have conversations as objects in a group show was so meaningful. So I wanted to share that show. And I'll end with this show, which is Exhibition as Healing. So Guadalupe Maravilla is an artist based in New York and from El Salvador, and this exhibition was actually a traveling exhibition. So sometimes what happens is a institution commissions a work, commissions an exhibition, and then hopes that it moves to other spaces so that the show can have different audiences or have a different life. Sometimes it's more logistical, like there's a lot of expenses that go into making a show, so sometimes there's like share costing, like if you travel a show you split the shipping of it. So there's things like that, and this show was originated in ICA Boston, and my colleague and friend there was telling me about it, and Lupe had come to Marfa as part of our artist in residence. And I was just really thinking about Texas at that time. You know, it's a border town, and there's like the Border Patrol has like a compound like not too far from here. And so I and two other colleagues in Texas said, like, why don't we, it's really expensive to ship something this huge, but we were thinking, like, why don't we do a Texas tour? Because I feel like this touches upon so many things that are happening in Texas. So Alex Klein at the Contemporary in Austin, and then Erica Holcomb at the University of Houston at the Blaffer, we all contributed and split the cost and brought this piece to different regions within Texas, because there's also complexities like based on where you are. So this piece is what Lupe calls his sculpture a healing machine. He is a cancer survivor. He also had to cross the border by himself at the age of 8, and he says that a lot of that time, like, it internalized, and he thinks that that's what kind of created this illness. But he survived cancer, and he was at Hunter College, as a sculpture major, and his faculty, they were like, what are you making? Like, they were trying to get him to be like more intellectual and like conceptual and abstract, but he's not. He's like a maximalist. Like, he's really guided by like these objects, and they're visual and they're represent something, to him, and he wants to share those stories with the world. And so when he graduated and also survived cancer, he's like, wait a minute, like, I can make the work I want to make. And part of his healing was through sound. So he's like really interested in how sound, the vibrations that happen in your body can basically heal parts of your body. So when he was doing like Western medicine and doing like chemotherapy, it really messed up a lot of the internal organs. And so he did a lot of like Eastern ways of healing, and sound was one of them, sound healing. And he thought, like, what if I made a sculpture that vibrated and you could lay in the sculpture and we could play the sculpture, and it was a vibrating machine. So let me see if there's other. So this is a view from it from the outside. This is of it at night. So those round things that you see are gongs that he's commissioned, and they have certain frequencies. And so what you see is like, I think it was over 600 objects that come apart. So the installers had to install each part, 600 of them, which is crazy. And what he does is, as he's traveling, he goes to the different places that he had to cross as a young child. So he's in Mexico, Tijuana, Mexico City. This bus itself came from Mexico City. Originally, it was he had another bus coming from El Salvador, but there's this long story with that bus. He actually has an Art 21, so you should watch this film. It's so fascinating. There's like this whole backstory to the bus itself and how the bus itself migrated, and how the bus itself had its own healing. Like, he had these shamans like bless it in this volcano. I mean, the story goes so deep. But this bus, it didn't make it. It was seized by the FBI or something. It was like a stolen bus, and he's like, oh shit, like the ICA just like bought that bus for me, and it's like now like contraband. So he had to get another bus. So he got this bus in Michoacan, and what he does is, as he's traveling, he goes to all these markets. He's like picking up objects as he's in these markets, and they mean something to him. They speak, something about them speaks to him, and he hopes that that will also generate ideas and storytelling with the viewer. And he also commissions, like, you know, on the top of the, or the front of the bus, you'll see these stone carvings. He'll commission stone carvers to make these kind of symbols. And so all these 600 objects mean something very particular to him, but also share something else. And so for the performance, he plays the gongs, and you could lay down and feel the vibrations of it. And he speaks so beautifully about healing, and it's like such an important part of his practice. And you know, it's very taboo. Like if we're thinking about like ways of making and the kind of like philosophy and the theory that we read, you know, it's very taboo to talk about healing. And so he was like, you know, never allowed to talk about it, but it was like really suppressed. But you know, there are artists like Mel Chin, like he went to Skowhegan and he met Mel Chin, and Mel Chin is a conceptual artist but also talks about healing. So there's different ways of doing it, and I think that's why it's important to like have the artist's voice in these exhibitions. But I just wanted to read something that he says about the healing part of his work. He says, "I tell people that everyone is their own healer. We are our own medicine, and when we create the spaces for sound and sculpture, we're opening up a portal to start and continue healing. I offer different tools that we need to heal ourselves." So it's like so much a part of the work. And you know, outside of the art practice, you know, he does a lot of community service with like undocumented people or cancer survivors. He also does this kind of wall drawing, chupa chuka, that he calls it, and he always gets like people that have similar stories to him crossing the border to like play this game. So there's also like, there's a lot of hard things that had happened in his life, but he really transforms it into like such joyful things and like playful things. And I think that's kind of like the interesting mix with his work. Like healing can be really dark and painful, but there's also like this lightness and this kind of playfulness that happens. So this is him playing this game with like two students that lived in Marfa and had come to the US through Mexico. And basically you make these little points and then you have to draw lines to get to those points, but like it's never a straight line, it's always circuitous, and it's like always fun to find out like where your line ends up. So I think that's it. Thank you for listening to me. Questions?
I know we're a little past.
Yeah, sorry.
If anyone has maybe one or two questions, feel free. Otherwise, you can take them.
Yeah, sure.
Daisy, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming visiting with us. I have a question about your history as a programmer, public,
Yeah.
Public programmer, and how, if that still affects how you think of an exhibition as sort of like a complete experience. Like, is that still, do you think of programs as you're kind of thinking of the curatorial aspects as well? Is that someone else's role? But I'm just curious, in terms of interface with public, there's all kinds of other things that can happen. And
Yeah.
I'm curious how you see that.
I feel like it's such an important part of an exhibition, and I feel like for some reason throughout our recent history, the exhibition is the thing you focus on and not the programs. But if you look even at the Whitney in the 90s, the public programs person was a curator. It was a curator of public programs. But somehow the objects took precedence in some ways. But I think public programming is so important because it interfaces the objects and the artworks with the public. And so, if you don't have that bridge and that dialogue, it can die. Your exhibition can totally fall flat and no one learns about the context or learns about different ways. Because I think the exhibition itself is so generative. So hopefully the public program will spin off or be tangential, but create a different way of thinking about something. So I actually love thinking about programs, and yeah, it's like a really important part to the exhibition making. Yeah. Any other questions? No. Thank you.